So glad to get out of that dang time travel machine.
Where'd you go?
I went back to the 80s to grab some of that good sports merch from my favorite defunct franchises. I spent my life savings on that machine.
You bought a time travel machine to buy sports merchandise.
Yeah, gladly.
You know you could have gone to 503 Sports, right? The website?
Yeah, no, I didn't think of that at all.
Yeah, they sell all sorts of throwback sports merch from leagues like the World Football League, XFL, UFL, and the Arena Football League, several others.
Shoot.
Yeah, they sell hats, shirts, even custom jerseys from all sorts of vintage sports teams.
Oh, man, I spent like a lot of money on that time travel machine.
Well, look, listeners of AFL Rewind get 10% off their first order by using the promo code ARENAFAN at checkout. That might help you out.
Yeah, it does.
Go on over to 503-sports.com and get your merch today.
Do you know anyone who wants to buy like a overpriced time travel machine?
No, sorry, I don't.
Welcome to AFL Rewind, a look back at all things arena football, sponsored by Phenom Elite. I'm your host, Tim Capper. Well, since we've been doing this historical series of podcasts, I've always had an issue of deciding on what type of interviews I like the most. I mean, all these interviews, you do get some great inside information, but with the players, you get the insight from them themselves on what happens on the field, during the game, in between games, that type of thing. But when it comes to those interviews with the executive, the ones that actually are dealing with a team during the day-to-day operations, usually you get a little bit more information about the team or about the league at the time than you would specifically when speaking with a former player. Well, this episode, we are going to be getting some insight to the Spokane Shock. We're going to be speaking with a gentleman who was, during his tenure, an integral part of the team, who rose from just being somebody who worked on the season ticket side of the team and used it as a stepping stool until he became one of the most, I would say, one of the most respected executives in the league at that time. This episode, we're going to be speaking with Ryan Eucker. Well, if you happen to follow the Arena Football League, and especially a certain team up in the Pacific Northwest, you happen to probably know this gentleman quite well. He, a man of many hats. If you knew the Spokane Shock, you knew how hard that this gentleman worked. We're going to be speaking with Ryan Eucker, a gentleman, as I said, who did so much for the Spokane Shock. Hey, thanks for joining us, Ryan.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
First, I want to find out. I mean, we know you started off. Basically your entire AFL career was with the Shock itself. You started off as an account executive back in December of 2010. You're joining a team, an organization that has just come off an Arena Bowl championship. But what I want to know from you is that how did you get involved and what brought you? Was it football itself that brought you into the AFL and the Shock, or was it something else in particular?
Yeah, it was football more or less. I mean, myself, I grew up in a small town in Washington State that, more or less is a Friday night lights situation and has had some great, players come through there, and including a current guy that's the offensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys and Kellen Moore that, played at Boise State. But, so I had a history in football and did a short spin on a freshman year of college. But once I was finishing up school at Eastern Washington University, I was kind of looking around for some jobs and knew I wanted to stay in sports in some capacity even though I was a business administration and kind of marketing emphasis graduate. But yeah, they had an opportunity pop up for a ticket sales spot. So I went in and interviewed with an owner, Brady Nelson, and his team over there, and ended up getting a gig. And, from there it was, off and running more or less. So it was my first chance to work in professional sports and really get my foot in the door and get some experience from, what I knew I needed to do from the ticket sales side. But also it was just one of those spots where I knew I was going to have a chance, at football and hanging around after hours and picking up everything I could to help out and learn more from, football equipment and player personnel and scouting with Ryan McBain and all that kind of stuff too. So it was a good combo of a little bit of everything.
How was it coming into the organization? Because as I said, they had just won the Arena Bowl. I mean, being the account executive that you were, I mean, did it make it easier for you being a first timer and trying to promote, obviously bringing more fans for the team itself for the 2011 season?
Yeah, make no mistake. I mean, it certainly makes it easy on a salesperson when a team has won a championship and you get to come in the season after. So that certainly, helped and eased probably the learning curve for me a bit, despite having a few other jobs, prior and throughout college and things like that as well. But it helped. I mean, coming off that win and selling towards the next season. But, the shock, from the AF2 days and then entering the Arena Football League in that first season in 2010 and winning the championship there, they had a great history. I mean, they, set records in terms of sellout games and pretty much sold every game out during their period of the AF2 and then heading into that season in 2010 as well. So
it's funny that you bring it up because I wanted to ask you because, a lot, when with the Shock coming over to the AFL, and everybody knows when it comes to when people think of the AFL, they think of certain sizes of the arena. Did the size of the arena in Spokane hurt you in any way when it came to selling tickets? Just to look at the opposite end of things.
I don't think so. I mean, they were typically, back in I'm having to scratch the surface here a little bit in terms of data. And, Andrew Dolan, my ticket director and boss that I have there at the Shock, will probably shake his head if he hears this a little bit just in terms of the numbers. But, they were typically selling out pretty well in advance, anywhere from 80 to 85% of their tickets, out of the gate. So, with season tickets, peaking at some point, around 6,500, 7,000 tickets, late in those 2 days out of an arena that was sitting about, 10-5 or 11 max with some floor space, and standing room space, sort of situation. They were pretty well stocked. I mean, they did an excellent job of getting folks in season tickets, and it was an extraordinary situation. So we were really in a demand spot that allowed us, and certainly the owners to take a look at some situations from the business perspective, once they made that jump from the AF2 to the AFL and some changes in expenses and business models and those different things came into play. So I don't think it hurt at all. I think if anything, it definitely probably helped Spokane's situation more or less. And really, I mean, if anyone had ever gone to a game there, I mean, the environment was absolutely electric. I mean, that place was Death Valley and, an extraordinary place to watch a sporting event. That's for sure.
For sure. And obviously, I think any team right now, no matter what sport you're in the smaller sports, if you can already have 70% of your seats filled.
Oh yeah,
that's amazing. So
unbelievable. Yeah, they did an excellent job. Certainly great coaches, great players. Winning helps, but the organization as a whole really, there in Spokane from starting in 2006 on, was a great organization.
Now, one question I've always wanted to ask you, because you were an account exec just for approximately 3.5 to 4 months, and after that point, you took on being director of marketing, communications, and player ops. How did you, in your opinion, how did you make the jump so quick?
Well, it extended a little bit. I mean, I continued a lot of those ticket sales related duties really for, about the first whole season that I was there. Okay. So, continuing that stuff through that first year. So it was really probably about a year and, 3 or 4 months in addition. So from there, though, I mean, I just did everything I could, like I mentioned, in terms of, scooping up those opportunities to pick up some additional jobs and stuff. And, I'd sell tickets during the game and then or during the day, and then I would, stay in the office afterward and I would do equipment or I'd, help with football operations and practice setup, clean up, set up for the next day, whatever it may be. So it worked out pretty well. And fortunately, being in a small organization, with, Brady and Adam Nebeker was a GM at the time and Lance Beck running, marketing and things like that too. All those guys were just, wide open and, having a great time and willing to, take the time to help out, young folks in the organization that wanted a bigger bite and to do some more stuff.
Right. Now, when you first started doing those three new jobs for the Shock, what was the one thing that you felt that, the team is doing well, as you said, in the stands. What did you think that you needed to do what needed to be improved the most? What did you feel that was lacking that you felt that you could improve being director of marketing, communications, et cetera?
Ooh, I think more than anything, probably just developing a little bit more over time in terms of some of just the graphics presentation, things like that. And that wasn't all just, myself per se in terms of, the creative side and things like that. We were fortunate to bring on some great individuals too that really, even interns that really blossomed with the organization and got some good experience and were able to move on too. But I think that was probably one of the big kickers. And then stepping into the operations side a little bit over time and controlling a little bit more, I guess, of the day-to-day, so to speak. I think one of the things that probably improved on most was the community outreach and that relationship in one aspect. I think, you and I have had conversations about it, and you could probably attest, though, too. I think the other side of it was probably a little bit more of just the direct connection from the communications, public relations, and kind of creating that voice on the back end for the organization for not only those direct, conversations or talks that we had with media individuals such as yourself, but even with fans and the accessibility and, having those, side conversations and late night social media exchanges and emails or text messages or whatever it may be with a season ticket holder over time too. So yeah, I think over time, from the marketing operations, despite some of those or beyond some of those updates, probably talking a little bit more of the operational and then community outreach, which was so great by staff like Crystal Medina and folks that I was able to, bring on and work with there for a number of years.
Yeah. Now, when you started getting into the player ops portion of your job, do you remember, you were talking about text, I just said, it just made me think of a question. It's like, what was the first late night text that you received? You may not have to go into necessary and into details, but what was the first late night text that you received that you finally said to yourself, yeah, I'm in it all right?
Ooh, I don't know if it was necessarily a text as much as it probably was that, really when I started getting into the player personnel side of it and everything, I think it was when I actually completed the playbook for the season for Coach Olson and working through with his staff and things like that too. Of course, I got to be the late night, tech guy and actually take all the plays from the whiteboard and everything else they drew up and put it in the computer system and, get that thing and create the notebooks and put all that. So I do remember like taking a picture and posting it on my stuff, first playbook, sort of done, of course, beyond what I, probably overly prepared for my 7th and 8th grade football team that I coached on the side during the falls. But that was probably the biggest thing. I think, player wise, man, I'm going to come back on that one. I'm going to think in terms of some of those first ones, but always entertaining with the player side for sure.
So you've actually opened my eyes a little bit more because, when people look at their titles, as you have really attested to now, is that it's really just a title because you are basically you were a guy that you wore so many hats. That's just crazy because I never even knew that you had done the playbook for the Shock. That's actually pretty cool. Do you still have a copy of your first ever playbook, Ryan?
I think I do.
Yeah?
I think I still got, despite moving around and being somewhat of a minimalist, I have a few kind of treasure bins that I still carry with me from place to place, with old shirts and jerseys, but then some old memorabilia and things like that too. And I think I did come across the original playbook there as well as a few others. So.
I was about to say, it's a good thing you didn't have to head over on the internet and pick up the what was it? the Memphis Pharaohs playbook that's over on the internet right now. So that's good to hear that Coach Olson wanted to run his own plays. So
yeah, no doubt.
Looking at marketing and communications, when you first started getting into the communications side of it, what did you find more challenging? Dealing with the press in Spokane, dealing with the press nationally, or dealing with the head office? Meaning the AFL head office.
Oh, the AFL office was a little bit of a challenge at times. I mean, we did go through a number of people. I mean, you can recall in terms of kind of the shuffle there over a few seasons, and really that trickled, through the teams too. I mean, those that came and gone year to year and, everything as well, and the different staff members and seemingly, updates to the directory that you would receive over the course of the, season that you were in with new names and phone numbers that you had to track down. But so that was always a little bit of a challenge at the AFL level, despite, they made some good strides and some folks there too that helped get things organized. I think, the national media was probably the most difficult just in terms of, outlets and education process and kind of working with those folks. I think, here in Spokane, our local media was awesome. I mean, our friends over at, KHQ, and then we had 700 ESPN and, Keith Oso and Dennis Patchen and Sam Adams and all these great folks that were just head over heels to work with us and, made it a really enjoyable experience too. So certainly those folks, made my job easier locally.
Now, was it frustrating at all, though, because you were saying, it's really your issues were more or less with the, as you said, some dealing with the national media. Did you feel, knowing that how long that this league had been around, that you would have thought that the national media would know more about the AFL than what they had currently had? I mean, we're talking 2012. The league had been around since '87.
Right. Yeah. And those are the exact kind of conversations that you have with folks. It's a similar situation, right? Media folks come and go. You get that turnover, especially at those sports anchors and, those products and stuff too. But yeah, it was surprising at times, just in terms of, especially when we started venturing back into markets, that had teams traditionally, over long periods of time, just to, get a little bit of playing coverage, sometimes it was frustrating, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure. Being the director of marketing at that time for the 2.5 years that you were there, holding those three names under with the team, what's the one thing that you were the most impressed or proud about when it came to one thing that you created for marketing?
Oh, geez. Probably working with my team and getting back into the mode of like our fan club. That was one thing that we relaunched there after a few years. Teams always go back and forth with that stuff, and sometimes it can be a tricky situation. I know early on in the AF 2 days in Spokane, they had a great kind of booster club, more or less, situation of rabid fans that came out and supported the players and helped out with stuff. But that was something that kind of faded away after a while. It takes some extra staff, it takes a lot of extra hours to manage those groups and things like that as well. So and working with Crystal Medina, who was my community relations gal, and went to college with her at Eastern Washington University and everything as well too. But working with her and relaunching that stuff, we gave those folks in our fan club and our boosters some pretty unreal access. I mean, we did a potluck, dinner at the offices / facility once a week. We brought the player, a player or two in, and we sat down and had food with them, and even front office individuals too, and did Q&As and had that access and dissected things and did focus groups. And, they got a lot of say in how things ran and what happened with the organization on the back end, and, what our planning and marketing strategies were going to look like in the future too. So I think that was one thing that, reinvigorating that and relaunching that under, my staff's, advisement and direction and stuff too was a big thing and helped a lot.
I'm sold. I don't live in Spokane, and I'm sold. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome.
Okay, on the opposite side, your worst marketing idea to you that you think it may have gone well, but what do you think was your worst marketing idea?
Oh man, I don't know. Oof.
Or something that didn't go as well as you thought it would. I mean, it doesn't have to be what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, I guess, from a marketing. We kept it pretty simple in terms of our outbound stuff. I think, it's probably more appropriate to share the funny stories and in-game entertainment, and things like that people see. I think, and Josh Clayton and Don McMullen, my guys too, will laugh. But, proposals of the game, I think we were like 2 for 5 or something.
Oh, wow.
Over the course of like a 3 or 4 year period. I mean, like, one, it's a shocker that a lot of anytime, and you can get out there and get a sponsor to actually, do a ring and do a proposal and that kind of stuff. But, we had a good sponsor crew that obviously was able to lock that in for a few seasons, but it was not the most successful promotion.
That's embarrassing. Oh man, not for you.
Cringeworthy, quick, go to the next.
Oh my
slides, sort of scramble. So those kind of stories and stuff like that's probably the fun, awkward, embarrassing, sports
quick
promotion.
Cut to the kiss cam right away.
Yeah.
So in 2012, on a second here. In 2012, I mean, you're coming off, the team's coming off a 500 season. And the team improved slightly in 2012. When it comes to what you did in player operations, what's the one thing that you remember the most, that first season, really taking on that position as being part of player ops?
Oh boy. And so what? My resume says 2012, 2013, somewhere in that range.
2014, yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, 2014. So, most memorable. I was really fortunate to step into that, situation and certainly coming through the ranks in Spokane and getting to learn from, Ryan Rigmaiden, who's still, with the Canadian Football League and working with Winnipeg and everything else as well. Getting to learn, the ropes from those guys and through the different coaches, seeing the tail end of Keefe and then being there during Andy's time as well. And then after the AFL days with Shackelford. But even early on, getting to learn from those guys and seeing that side of the house was definitely a big, a big boost and helped me a lot early on. I think, I'm losing. I guess I lost track of your question already. I got so many memories spinning through my head at the moment.
I can imagine. It's was there ever a player? What's one player that you remember the most that you may have had the most influence of getting to Spokane? How about that?
Oh, geez. I mean, that would have been a little bit more on the later part. I mean, certainly.
Okay.
My helping with the player operations side and getting those guys set up and things like that. I'm trying to think of one of the early guys. I mean, there was that big transition period between myself and Rigmaiden, and then Andy working a lot of the player personnel stuff, and I was a little bit more of the operational support. But I had quite a few guys early on that I'll admit that I got really excited about, and I brought in, and then I had to take the fun brunt conversation of who the heck is this guy from, one of the coaches where I saw some flashes on film. So that was one of those fun learning experiences for sure. And having those conversations. Yeah. I had a couple guys though that we brought in during time, I think one of my early ones that I still, and I followed after he left us, he didn't end up actually making our roster, but Tyrone Laughinghouse was a guy that we had brought in, and he played at St. Augustine with Rory Nixon, our center and fullback at the time, but really good wideout. I was super excited to get him in there. He had some good reps with us on workouts during the season. Just didn't quite make the cut, but ended up going on and having a great career in, with which he played with Wichita Falls in the Indoor Football League. He played with Billy Back also out in Carolina with the Cobras, and he was a guy that I enjoyed watching and had early on, and certainly fun to see those guys at least go on and have a good career someplace else.
How was the learning curve though, getting on? Because you came in from from university, coming with a marketing degree, and now you're director of marketing, which I'm sure is what you were hoping to do, but you're part of communications and player ops now. How much of a learning curve did it take for you to get used to everything, or was it because you did wear so many hats that you were able to pick things up quickly?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a help. I usually refer to myself as a utility guy. I mean, I just do a lot of different things, and that's just always kind of how I've been. So that was definitely a big help. Certainly the learning curve from the football perspective was a little interesting. I mean, I had the background and obviously, having played growing up and then a little bit of college, but following, with it pretty strongly. I think the biggest thing was, again, the opportunity to sit, next to a guy like Ryan Rigmaiden, who then, breaks down every position and what we're looking for and what those specifics were. I mean, that was, a PhD education in arena football in, a very short period of time. So definitely helped, in my progression and what that meant over, my future career.
Well, I want to head back at least to 2011 because I want to hear your talk, what your thoughts are about this because, it being the Arena Football League, you usually, usually where you play is in the name of the league, the name of the league itself, the Arena Football League. But the Spokane Shock took it amongst themselves to do something that, as far as I know, had not been done at all, playing a game completely outdoors. Unlike what was done in Pittsburgh in the early days where the Igloo was able to open up for most of the games back in the early days of the Arena Football League. Take us through what it took. And now I'm hoping you were involved in this quite a bit, but what was it? How much did it take to get this game up and going over Joe Albi Stadium to have that outdoor game?
To this day, myself and a few of the folks that I keep in regular touch with that were a part of that whole setup and event are still dumbfounded that we actually played that game. The whole setup and process. I mean, we were there the entire week, leading up to it because with that outdoor setup and, a lot of people didn't realize, I mean, we couldn't just come in and, play on top of an outdoor field. So we actually had to bring in and I don't even know the exact square footage per se of a football field, or of an arena football field, but we had to bring in all the plastic decking, and then we had to bring the turf rolls in and get that set up, and then we had to bring in, walls and figure out how we were going to get those things to stand up, which turned into more or less 2x4s and 2-ton eco blocks getting dropped on the back of them, with a forklift. And it was just an absolute experience. I mean, we slept at that place over the course of that week, and getting everything set up and ready to go, while, thankfully in Eastern Washington, we have some beautiful summers and didn't have to worry about, any rain necessarily coming through. But more or less we're sleeping out there crossing our fingers there wasn't some, random storm that came in. But
Right.
yeah, it was an experience. Bringing cranes in to hold up those field goal or the rebound nets,
Yep.
on either end of the field as well, was an experience. But we were literally setting those 2-ton ego blocks to hold the dasher walls up before the game, really when gates were opening.
Wow,
So
man.
we're down there teetering these eco blocks on a forklift, and we got 10, 15 total guys out there between front office and intern, putting this thing in place, and then 5 or 6 of us, running and putting our shoulders into the dasher boards to make sure they're not going to slide or, go someplace if a football player goes into it at full speed. So yeah, people, I'm glad they enjoyed the game. There's some great photos, some great footage. Definitely something I will never do again.
When was it initially brought up and decided in the front office that this game was going to be played? Because I'm sure people will remember when it was announced, but was it talked about in 2010 when you first came in? Was it in the 2010 off season? When was the initial idea actually brought forth and basically said that we're going to be doing this in 2011?
Yeah, they already had plans in place even when I got there in December 2010. So
Wow.
they knew they were going to do it. I mean, I can recall, after a few months of being there, so late winter, early spring there at the start of the next season, I still kind of started, trying to dabble in some of the graphic stuff and things like that. And so then at that point I did recall, getting a hold of some of the Joe Albi Stadium logos that were, prepared and pretty much ready to go from a marketing perspective. So yeah, they were locked and loaded. They had their plan in place, despite, like I mentioned, we had to figure out a few things, a little bit on the fly. But, Lance Beck, a guy that, oversaw a lot of that stuff from our game production standpoint, obviously did a great job and, getting the people in the right places, and had enough young, able, college-aged bodies out there to throw us around a football field for a week and get that thing set up and ready for a game.
Did you, at any time during the whole setup and leading up to game time and stuff, I know you guys are probably watching the weather forecast very intently. Did you personally wish that it would rain just to throw a huge, not necessarily a wrench, but something very even more unique than what was being played on the field that night?
That definitely would have been interesting. The funny part is that it did start raining after the game. At the very end, we started getting a few little sprinkles, and then basically once the game ended, autographs were done, people started clearing out. It did start raining at the arena.
Oh man.
Or at the stadium, which was even worse because we essentially had to scramble to get that field rolled up before it turned into a giant sponge, and then soaked up all that water and turned into something we couldn't move at that point. So joke was on us. I don't think I wished for it during the game. I really wanted just a smooth sailing, nice experience, which we got, and it was great. And then after the game, it bit us back one last time.
Was there ever a contingency plan put in place, Brian, where you would have had to have gone back to the arena?
Man, I feel like we did talk about it, but with the weather outlook and everything like that, it was kind of one of those things 4 or 5 days in advance. Again, we're fortunate in Eastern Washington and that time of year. Very, very rarely do we get rain. So I think looking at the thing, it was discussed, as I recall, but not really a priority or something that we actually thought was going to happen. So
yeah, that's good. But overall, from what you said, you wouldn't want to do it again, but it's something that you will be able to check off on your life's list of things that you've done.
Hey, absolutely. Well, and it's still, actually after that point, continuing to work in obviously event management and sports and all that kind of stuff too. It was definitely a learning experience. So I think, once you achieve something like that, and the amount of hours and everything else that you put in to get it done, it changes your perspective a little bit, and certainly makes things easier, later on down the road when you have something come up like that. So.
Oh, for sure. Was there any other that you know of? Had they talked about doing a second game? Because I can't remember if they had talked about doing a second game the next year because it did go so well. Well, it seemed it because, you drew 17,000, which is the largest crowd for the Spokane Shock at that time. So was there talk of ever doing it again?
I feel like there was for about 30 seconds after the game, and then the staff gave that look, to ownership, like, that's a great idea. You should definitely go find someone to do that for you. So, so I think it would have been probably a mild case of mutiny had they attempted to get us to relaunch that sucker a second season in a row.
I'm sure you were, while you were setting up, and then you look down the line of what happened in the history of sports. I guess it makes you even think a little bit more. You have a lot more respect for how they set up, that yearly NHL game outside, or whether it be Canada or wherever they've been holding the Heritage Classic, or so it gave you a little bit more respect. It was on a smaller scale, but still, as you mentioned, it just wasn't a case of just plopping the field on another field. You had to basically pretend like it was you're putting the field down in the arena.
Yeah, anywhere that you're creating your surface to play on in a remote location has my respect. That's for sure.
Yeah. In August of 2014, you took on another job with the director of operations. Just something that came about that you said, what I'm interested in. Was it offered to you? How did you end up becoming the director of ops?
Yeah, so during that time, that was when, John McMullen was still there handling the game operations. And Tracy Malingo was our vice president at that time. So vice president, more or less team president, handling the day-to-day operations and managing everything, from an internal aspect. And so at that time, she basically brought John and I in and kind of split the organization, kind of internal, external, at that point. And so I took over the operations, which really just meant operations, marketing, communications, football operations. John handled promotions and game execution and helped out with the marketing stuff and things like that as well. We were actually even roommates during that time, out in Spokane. So we were pretty much double teaming the operation and handling the day-to-day business, as a whole. So. Wow.
Yeah, your team had so you jumped in the off season of 2014. You've been 14-4 in 2013. You guys were 11-7 in 2014. So you basically changed position just right after the Shock's loss to San Jose that year in 2014.
Yep.
And I've asked other executives this before. When it comes to being where you are in the organization, how much do you pay attention? Obviously, you're a huge part of it. But when it comes to what happens on the field, you're doing so much. You're so invested. Let's say, you versus being you as a fan, how much do the wins and losses differ from you being in the head office versus, say, if you had been a fan?
Ooh. For me, not much. It was pretty important. And certainly I think, as those years went on and we, had the continued success, it was almost a requirement, was the tough part in Spokane in particular, because they had so much success early on and maintained that level, from the AF2 into the AFL. And, even those records that you talk about, and even that season, we went 500, and everything as well. Mm-hmm. You go back through and you look at the schedule and the divisions, and everything else. And every single year we were right in the thick of it. We were, one of those top teams competing. But if we were number 2 or we were number 3, it didn't really matter what side, of the ball you're on per se, fan or player / front office staff member. It was pretty important, and people scrutinized and got a little worried, and ticket conversations got different, and sponsor conversations got different. So, maintaining that was extremely stressful and certainly, weighed, I think, equally, no matter which side I looked at it or what perspective I looked at it from internally speaking.
Yeah. Now, looking at how the team drew for those last couple of years, as when the Shock were still the Shock, did you ever get a lot harder to draw fans in? Because you were going from obviously 70% fill right at the very beginning because of season tickets, but it seemed to be that it tailed off when it came to attendance slightly. You weren't drawing your 10s anymore. You were drawing around 8.3, 8.6, whatever it may have been, and you would peak, I'm sure, when a major rival would come in. Do you think that it's because of how well the team was doing, or do you think, because Spokane does have some other minor league teams, do you think that there was something that was why fans were not coming out, even though you guys were being so successful?
Yeah, after that first transition, and then within a few years there, essentially, I think in this market it just became like a ticket price situation. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we had increased costs from the league affiliation standpoint, and when we mmade the change from the AF2 to the AFL, and then medical workers comp, all those different elements on the back end. Those you don't balance out on those costs. They continuously go up over the course of businesses operations. So those different things impacting, and then the increase in ticket sales, I think ultimately was what made it a little bit more challenging for us to get those folks in.
Yeah.
So we played with stuff over time, and that was even an early on decision, and as part of the transition and such. But those were a little bit more the key factors, I think. But you're right though too. I mean, we weren't the only ticket in town. Certainly there in the spring and other stuff going on. With Chiefs hockey and
yep.
The baseball team. The Indians out here and stuff as well. So. Definitely made it, challenging at times, just depending on when the schedule was and what occurred. But, factors came into play, and we weren't the hot new ticket in town per se anymore. So, we had to get a little more creative and expand some sales, efforts and do some different stuff from the promotion side to, keep those folks coming back and try to convert those individuals back to season tickets.
Now, being director of operations, obviously, you're going to be, you're going to help develop the profit loss and expenses, the budgets and stuff like that. Obviously, when it comes to the AFL, there were some teams that were not pulling their weight and such. How was it when it came to the extra costs that may have been accrued by the Shock, just in order to prop up X, Y, or Z team? I mean, I'm sure it did happen, but how did you, being in the head office, how were you able to deal with stuff like that?
Yeah, and that's a little bit of a tough one to answer, because certainly, I remember getting, those invoices from the league office to, cut an extra 6-digit check, to split split the expenses, between the teams to handle them through the end of the year. So certainly difficult situation. I don't think from a front office perspective, just with the way that I know a lot of these teams, operated from just a structure perspective.
Right.
I don't think from a director of operations, general manager, team president standpoint, you ever really get used to that.
Right.
and it was definitely something where you get that invoice and you immediately, and myself at that time, I mean, shoot, we're talking 2014, 2015. I mean, I was a 27, 28-year-old, general manager, kind of learning a little bit of this stuff on the fly. So I'm getting that invoice and then turning around and calling my owner saying, how do you want me to handle this? Where do I put this, in my budget, sort of thing. And definitely makes those conversations interesting, to say the least.
How was Brady Nelson as an owner? And you're just mentioning there, you had to call and basically say, well, Brady, how are we going to do this? When obviously it seemed from day one that Brady was so invested, and you could tell. I think he was a huge cheerleader, not only for the league when he came in, but for the Shock themselves. For those who do not know about Brady Nelson, I mean, how would you categorize him?
Brady was a master of promotion and creative. I mean, he just had this natural understanding and knack of like how things needed to look, how they needed to be presented, what that timing needed to be. He was a showman, in some capacity in terms of just his understanding from that presentation and, execution side of the house. So, beyond what he did with the football, a lot of people don't realize too, he actually had an MMA league, more or less, or showcase that he ran on the side as well. And so there were even a few different events that we ran at the Shock practice facility where we were doing MMA events on, Friday night, sort of gig, and throwing a cage down on our practice, field sort of thing, rolling that up and then throwing a cage down and doing some fun stuff. But Brady was great. I mean, he was always, sales oriented and generating those ideas, certainly putting together sponsor packages and things like that. And learning that side of the house from him early on was huge. He was a big impact on those different areas, certainly for the team. Most of the checks that I'm referring to, though, just for clarity purposes, was when Nodder, took over the team. So actually,
there we go. Okay.
2013, there was a little bit of a buy-in with Ryan Gee and Nodder Nahini. And then after that, it turned in 2014, 2015, it turned into a owner or Nodder taking over the majority ownership.
That's true. I'd forgotten about that. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and so he was the one that I was working with a little bit more directly in terms of operations and when I was general manager of the team. And during those interesting times when said referenced checks needed to be cleared and where those needed to be coming from. So
okay, well, then it begs the question when it comes to Brady versus Nodder, when it came to having to dole out more money, which is basically what it is, and which owner, in your opinion, was, I don't want to say easier to get the money out of, because that sounds crude, but I think you know what I'm getting at. Which owner was say, okay, give it to me, I'll write the check. In your opinion, which one was easier to get the money out of?
Ooh.
Money's money. I get it.
Most of my experience was with Nodder. I mean, when Brady was running the team and handling that, they are they're polar opposites in terms of business operations and, mindset and communication styles, and all those different things. I mean, two very, very different people. I think a lot of the success early on, the organization and even myself, joining the team and being young, but then I can look back now and, pretty easily put two and two together in terms of understanding probably what their, revenues and things like that looked like from 2006 to 2009. And then, even that 2010 season, in 11 and 12, having success, from a ticket sales standpoint and such. So I think, there's probably a few less checks early on, going out and when they made that transition during a few of those key years in 10, 11, 12, 13. But, Nodder was a little bit more invested, I think, at the league level.
Okay.
He got involved and wanted to be, kind of a part of those different committees and things like that, which was exciting from a, staff standpoint, just being able to, obviously intertwine with that and learn some additional areas, from the league perspective beyond individual departments. And so I think he was a little more invested in some areas. And so while he certainly didn't enjoy cutting certain checks to particularly prop up teams that, decided to make an early exit, I think he was a little bit more willing and it was a little bit easier conversation usually, to get that past him and cleared through. So,
yeah, I can imagine now. The Arena Football Hall of Fame has returned, and we want you to become a part of the family. Introducing the Arena Football Hall of Fame Patreon. Whether an All-Star or a Hall of Famer, our reasonably priced tiers each have their own exclusive perks. Early access to the AFL Rewind podcast, honorary selection committee member, and much more. Help us build a Hall of Fame we'll all be proud of. Head to patreon.com/AF Hall of Fame to join. And one thing I wanted to ask you about is, there was a huge difference in 2014 versus 2015 for the Shock. One of the big things is losing a guy who I'm sure was very well known and loved in the city, in Eric Meyer. You being a part of the the director of operations, how obviously everybody remembers how when it comes, there really are no technically not long-term contracts in the Arena Football League. And later on in the years, it was single-year contracts, etc. How tough was it losing Eric Meyer and then having to decide on who was going to be being the starting quarterback?
Yeah, that was really hard. I mean, obviously, especially for, at that time with Andy Olson being the coach and working with Eric, and, Andy's a extremely, bright, play caller and very sophisticated in things as well in the football field. And so those two had a great relationship and obviously had a lot of success, and Eric Meyer just had this, natural knack. E-Money was as exciting, to watch on the field as he was to be around off the field, just from a, pure entertainment and character standpoint. But, it was certainly tough. And we, unfortunately in Spokane, we kind of developed some thick skin for it though. Right. I mean, we saw that year to year. I think, the conversation, more times than not was, the younger stepchild, up in Spokane, and we went and found some great talent over the years. And usually you would see those guys ending up on a different roster within, 2 to 3 seasons. And, certain teams just had a little bit more influence, I'll say, than what we were capable or willing to do from, certain areas of the budget. So that's kind of what it was. So.
That's a very good way of putting it. Was it sort of a craw though when Eric goes to San Jose and he wins the championship? Doesn't that sort of really put? I would hopefully it lights a fire under your ass as an organization saying, "Wait a minute."
Oh, 100%. I mean, and I knew it well before that still too, but that was not a good thing. I mean, next thing you know, you got Eric Meyer there, you got Adrian Tennell there, who obviously had a great career with us as well. I mean, beyond other, names that I can go through, but that one hurt. And, Eric being a hometown guy and stuff like that as well, obviously playing at Eastern Washington University, and the success that he had there was, helped our, model here in Spokane. But yeah, tough to watch, no doubt.
I'm sure. And obviously also with the shock in 2015 too, with the team ending up going 7-11, I think what most people need to remember too is that you basically had 6 signal callers that year. You had Eric Meyer, who was he got injured in later years, mind you, but you ended up having 6 guys and some pretty big names in the AFL. I mean, you can Warren Smith, Arvell Nelson, Carson Kaufman, Danny Southwick, Jarrett Brown, and Matt Bissiner. That must have, for you being the director of ops, how hard is it just to go through all those quarterbacks?
Oh, yeah, it was tough. I mean, and supporting Andy as he was bringing guys in and working through those different quarterbacks. I mean, you remind me some names. I kind of forgot a little bit, and now that I'm thinking about it, just how much success. And I just saw Danny Southwick get signed by the New Jersey team in a lower league. I think him and Warren Smith both are still playing.
That's correct. Yeah.
And our would be too if the league were still around here at this point. But it was tough. I got real confused on hotel itineraries and getting people set up in rooms, and this I think we had to find a few extra apartments that year due to some injuries, and getting guys set up and taken care of for the season, to say the least.
Yeah. Now, for those who may not know, can you give us an idea what it is like when a player does get hurt and you have to bring somebody else in? Are you able to give the Cliff Notes version of what you need to do as a director of operations in order to make sure that this player is here on time in Spokane and he is ready to come on the field and practice? Yeah,
I mean, obviously, I guess not obviously, but situation, you get an injury during a game, you're going to have to replace the position. Typically you have some sort of short list, more or less, hopefully a few guys from camp that didn't get picked up someplace else that, at least have had a few weeks in the system and can come in and, fill a gap, maybe while you continue to look for somebody else if it doesn't work out. But more or less, if that happens during the game, and like it even did, with Eric getting hurt when we were down in LA playing the Kiss and broke his collarbone, coach looks at you and says, hey, we need a quarterback on Monday, and we're playing there on a Saturday. So, you're instantly on the phone, more or less, and short version, figuring out, when can they get on a flight, get that booked for them as quickly as you can, get them into town, into the hotel, and pretty much they're suited up, ready to go, by the time coach is in the office on Monday and start an install for the coming week. So it's more or less kind of like booking an emergency flight for a family member and trying to get them, into town as quickly as possible.
In that type of circumstance, how does money work into the equation? Obviously, there is no cap in the Arena Football League. But how does money work in this circumstance? Is it you're going to get paid the league minimum, or depending on who the name is, when we're talking about another quarterback, does it matter who the person is, or was there a set limit that you could go to? Was there any negotiating, or was it just a matter of, yes, we need you, here's what we can offer, will you play for us?
Yeah. I'll laugh when I say it depends what team you were going to go play for.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, there was set, numbers. I mean, there wasn't really any negotiation to be had based on the contracts. You were getting a certain amount of money depending on, years of experience, and it shuffled back and forth. I feel like we had two different CBAs when I was in the Arena Football League. And so there was a little bit of adjustment with quarterback pay at one point, them getting, $1,200 a game versus other positions getting $800 a game. And then I know we toyed around with like rookie was, $700 and vet could earn up to, I think it was $850 or something along those lines. And so, so negotiation, things like that really wasn't a part of the process. Technically speaking, if I remember correctly, between the Arena Football League and the Indoor Football League, teams technically weren't even supposed to pay for like travel for guys and things like that, though, as well. Typically, it was on the player and his agent if he was involved to get that guy there.
Right.
I think it was a little bit of a loose rule, obviously. I mean, I just admitted that I bought, plenty of guys plane tickets in order to get them there to play, sort of gig. Just kind of came down to the team, and I think it was a little bit of a underlining understanding that we took care of some of those other, extra little travel bills and things like that for those players, knowing they weren't making a whole lot of money. So.
Is there ever at any point where there was a case where you guys wanted to sign a player and the league office said no?
Ooh,
I mean, because remember, the league did claim that it was a single entity, that they signed all the contracts, et cetera. So I just felt that the question should at least be asked, because we're curious to know.
Yeah, so there's a tricky way to answer this.
Oh, trick away.
I guess. The league never told me I couldn't sign anyone.
Okay.
If there was an individual that I went to sign that maybe had a history for one reason or another, that would raise a red flag if there were to be like some sort of shared database, sort of thing, then someone from the league level would probably say, hey, you may want to think about this a little bit longer, type gig. Of course, that didn't have to do necessarily with medical and things like that. More often than not, it was more of a character and experience, or, something, a bad exit from, a prior organization.
Right. Was there a case where Coach Olson just said, screw that and sign him anyways? Or were you guys very open to what the league was telling you? Or did you or would you have taken it as an ultimatum from the league to basically say, stay away?
Yeah. There were plenty of situations where we had an extended conversation with individuals to learn a little bit more and ask them directly. And then if they, cleared that situation, then it was usually like, let's bring him in and see how he does. And if we need to get rid of him, we can. So
okay. So vetting. So basically the league said something and you would have to vet the player even more.
I mean, you can imagine. I mean, you covered the Arena Football League long enough. You saw how, journeymen, for lack of a better word, with guys that, would just re-emerge out of nowhere and sign with, teams over and over and over again. And next thing you know, you got these receivers that have been playing for 8, 9, 10 years, sort of gig, and had plenty of red tape, more or less when it came to, an injury, situation. But teams were willing to roll the dice and see what happened.
Yeah, but, that never happened, only in the playoffs.
Right.
Was there a point at any time for somebody that you may have reached out, told Coach Olson about, and the players said no?
Ooh.
Because obviously, as you said, there were some teams were able to do certain things differently by certain means.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, just overall, do you remember of a particular player that you guys were really interested in, and then he just said? It didn't necessarily mean that he ended up in another team, but he just said, no, thanks, but no thanks.
I don't think we did. I really can't. I honestly cannot think of a conversation where I had with a guy where he wasn't at least interested. I was never outright turned down. I think other than, like you mentioned, more so just the competition factor in trying to get somebody there, and there was already a better deal on the table. Why there was a better deal, I'm not sure, because they should have all been the same, is what I was told. But it happened. It just was part of the process.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about, because there were rumors that certain teams had more means than others, as we keep alluding to without actually saying it. And anybody who's listening to this podcast and knows the league, they know what we're talking about without us actually making a statement, not an accusation, a statement. How did you feel? You've been in the league for such a long period of time at that point, and you'd seen what had happened. Everybody had thought, even though there was a CBA in place, and it stated that starters were going to get this, if you're a backup, you're going to get this, rookies, per diems, et cetera, et cetera. How frustrating was it for you as an organization to know that there was a free agent that you guys were seriously looking at, and then you were outbid by the almighty dollar?
Yeah, I think there were two ways that I think I had to look at it. Obviously from an organizational standpoint and things, frustrating. I mean, you kind of look at it as or feel like we're all competing in the same league. We all signed the same agreement. We should be able to uphold those, rules, standards, whatever they may be, and operate at the same level. That would be a pretty, standard or, I guess, baseline ethical, sort of conversation. I think from the other side, though, too, as frustrating as it was being on the football / operations side, and also being a younger, person too, working in the organization, and shoot, my whole staff was younger, but
yeah,
working with these guys and being relatively close to the players, in age and things too, we got frustrated, but you also just kind of accepted it. I mean. Of course, you used it as a competition, like, okay, let's just go find the next guy, sort of gig. It did become a recurring piece, it felt like, where our guys ended up with these other teams after, like I mentioned earlier, a couple of seasons and, playing someplace else. And, it wasn't anything to do with the organization. It was just something else. But, that was certainly tough to wade through a little bit. But you had to understand that the players are just trying to make money. And so, being a younger person and being on the football side, you got upset with the team, but you didn't necessarily get upset with the player, and usually wish them the best and said, "Hey, I don't blame you. I'd take it too. So go ahead, and we'll see you in the playoffs."
Right. What about the league head office? I mean, I'm sure, they're promoting, as I said, it's a single entity league. We're all here together. We're all here as one giant league. We're here to, we want to have great games and put on a great show for everybody. Did at any point was there any reason? Would you have complained? Did you express your frustration to the front office, or was it a matter of there's no real reason to complain because you knew what the answer was going to be?
Yeah, definitely the latter.
Yeah.
I can't think of too many conversations I had with the league. I mean, they're more or less their ability to stay, out of that conversation, because they were single entity is technically they were cutting the players' checks.
Yeah, that's true.
All the payroll systems, everything went through the league office. They were played through the league office. Their players received their checks. So, basically, as far as the league knew, this is exactly what, player Joe Smith received this week because that's what we paid him. We don't know what you're talking about with, other money or extras.
Yeah. Big change for the franchise and for you guys at the end of 2015. And this is a story I'm sure that many not know about, and I hope this is one you can get some inside information about. It is decided that the Shock organization is going to be leaving the Arena Football League and going to be leaving for the Indoor Football League, and they will become rebranding because of certain situations I hope we can get to. From the Shock to the Empire. At what point, Ryan, was it decided, or had been talked about for a while, that the ownership was going to be bringing the team out of the AFL to the IFL?
Yeah, so, as that season, the 2015 season, started winding down, Nodder had been then owning the team and operating for a couple years, 3 years, more or less between the ownership transition and then taking over majority control. So, once we got toward that end of the season, we just, looking at the numbers and where we were going to end up, based on attendance and everything else that was kind of occurring, and then looking at, commitments for the upcoming year and what was going to happen with the Arena Football League, et cetera. We had to start having those conversations just from a business, sustainability. To put it blunt, the AFL is just too damn expensive. I mean, from the single entity perspective and, paying into a league-wide workers' comp, that had to be based out of Illinois in order to cover, teams that weren't able to acquire workers' comp within their states, like those teams in Florida and then California. The Sabercats were, grandfathered in and, some other stuff too. But we just couldn't make the numbers work. And so once we got through that 2015 season, it was more or less down to we either make this jump or, we consider the prospect of going dormant or taking a year off or maybe even not playing, just because we couldn't make the numbers, sit upright more or less. So, we just had to make the call. And that was the singular factor was just a business model and really, red and black sort of situation.
Right. For those, and I'm curious to know because I don't know these numbers, and I'm hoping you can shed some light. When it came to league dues for AFL versus the IFL, what was the difference in the actual amount? Approximately, if you don't know for sure.
Well, yeah. So I don't want to reference exactly what the Indoor Football League dues are, just because obviously they're continuing to operate and things like that. I'll tell you that. My operational budget, like what I was running off of, and this was everything. I mean, not only front office, but obviously rents, arenas, putting on the show, promotions, marketing, league dues, medical, you name it, whatever. When I moved from the Arena Football League to the Indoor Football League, I cut $1.7 million out of my operational budget.
Wow. And obviously, for minor league football or a minor league sport, that's a huge chunk of change.
Huge chunk of change, yeah. So I was having a hard time there at the tail end of the AFL shock. I was having a hard time getting us to get below $2.8 million a year. And then transitioning to the Indoor Football League in our first season and taking into account, we had to do some asset purchases and the rebrand and some new buy and merch buy and all that kind of stuff too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I drop it down to a high end of 1.2.
Wow. That's
which is manageable, which is doable. I mean, I think for a lot of these teams out there and, speaking as indoor football as a whole, I think that's one thing that they got right, is that business model and that concept. Granted, of course, you're not able to pay the players quite as much, but we also structure things differently. And I think they have a little bit of a better, model in that regard.
Obviously, the union was in a way, for a few years, it was a thorn in the side of the teams and league. But we understand why the union is there, and for the players and stuff like that. In your opinion, how much do you think that the players' union, did they cause more problems than it hurt the team itself? Because, as you said, the salaries increased when the new CBA came to account, but yet it also kept the type of player, it kept the play like everybody knew when it came to the AFL as being the top tier of play in all the indoor leagues.
Yeah. Ask your question.
How do you feel that the Players Association in your time there, that the Players Union help or hindered the team itself?
Hindered, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. That was a very difficult, situation, and like you mentioned, it was definitely challenging. I think the biggest issue that we bumped into, was the players just weren't educated. The union had some very strange opt-in, rules or bylaws essentially as a part of their membership where, players were automatically, members unless they opted out, but then when it came to like voting situations and getting stuff through, a no vote was a yes vote. No vote meaning like not present, sort of thing. Was a yes vote instead of
an abstain or something like that. Yeah.
It wasn't an abstention. It was like it went somewhere to the positive or something to that extent. So there was just some we had to hear all the nightmare stories, of course, because players would then come to me and ask, why do I have this taken out of my paycheck? Why, what's this fee? And I just had to look at them and say, you're going to have to talk to your union rep. I don't know what to tell you. I don't control that. So it was frustrating and lack education. I think it was a weird union versus owners, sort of mentality where for some reason the union thought owners and front office and all these people were getting rich off owning and running Arena Football League teams, which I can absolutely tell you was not the case. So it was just, a constant battle back and forth.
What you just got into the league at the time, with the Shock itself, and then, the 25th anniversary pops up in 2012, and then you have, you basically had what people are dubbing the Olive Garden game between Pittsburgh and Orlando, national television, and you have scrubs playing on the field. Do you remember what you were thinking at that time? I mean, I know you're at the time you were quite new with the team itself, but I mean, do you remember what you thought at that point? What yourself getting into?
Yeah, we were watching that, and I can't say we weren't laughing a little bit, in the situation, just at how seemingly absurd it was. Kyle Rowley was a part of that whole process. Mm-hmm. Who obviously had played in Spokane and won a championship here and things like that as well. And so we knew Kyle, and I didn't know him super well personally, and so I'm not speaking in this way as a personal bit, but I was around him enough to know his mentality and his nature in terms of when he says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. And so we were sitting back watching that whole thing, wondering what the heck was going on, and I think we pulled our team in and had that conversation in terms of here's what's happening. It's now, we're up next, sort of gig, and more or less our guys kind of gave us that look and that thumbs up, like, no, we're playing. Like, don't you worry about that, sort of gig. So yeah, it was interesting though. That's for sure. A little bit of a fright, factor for some teams out there, but
I can imagine. What was the fan base's thought when you guys were saying that you were going to move from the AFL? Because for some, and I'll give an example of the Albany Firebirds, them leaving for Indianapolis in 2000 and them switching to AF2 just the next year, we saw how the fan base did not take it very well and show that by not showing up. When you guys thought when you were thinking of moving, did you speak with the fan base in any way? Did you have focus groups to try to say what they would think about it, or were you just trying to keep it in-house, so to speak, until you actually made the decision and then take it from there?
Yeah, we kept it internal as long as we possibly could. Obviously looking at the numbers and trying to figure out, and a lot of those conversations were going down to the wire. I mean, we were, I think the last game of our season, then we were down in Arizona, or less, and so we were trying to stretch that out. We didn't want it to necessarily get public. I was having conversations on the back end with folks just in terms of kind of getting that baseline understanding, and and that included people here in the community that I trusted and knew I could sit down with and kind of get their feelings on what they thought this was going to mean exactly. We tried to keep it hush as long as we could. Once it broke, and it actually did more or less get announced during our game in Arizona.
Oh boy, God.
Yeah, so that was fun because then, players get into the locker room after the game, and we had lost that game. So tempers were already starting to flare, and then they caught wind of that. And they had caught wind really, within minutes of getting back to their, lockers and looking at their phones. So by the time I was upstairs finishing up, email, press release, posting to the website, by the time I got downstairs, I walked in the room and I just felt like this cold glare, from about every corner of that place. Yeah. And it got put on me, like, more or less. So that was a fun, not fun conversation, bus ride and flight home.
I can imagine. What was the information leaked, Ryan? Did somebody leak it? Or was it, did somebody in the press jump the gun?
I'm trying to remember who it was. I feel like there was a tweet. I think someone from the press jumped the gun. I think they held on to it as long as they could, and then it finally got out, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
So not blaming anybody. It was what
No.
it was going to happen sooner or later, but happened at the worst possible time. I will reiterate that.
At this point, obviously your career in the AFL has ended, and you moved on and you did some very good things in the IFL. What's the one memory that you're going to take away the most from your career in the AFL?
Oh man, I don't know if I can take one. I mean, there's so many. I worked with a lot of really good folks. Being able to travel around, and I think eventually when I'm able to do that podcast or book that we talked about earlier and stuff too. I mean, I was a mid-20s, something working at the executive level for a, professional sports team, traveling to different, cities for road games every weekend, that we weren't home for 6 months out of the year and, having a pretty good time. So it's difficult for me to probably pick out one moment that I would say was probably like my most fun or most memorable. Mm-hmm. I think I got a whole series that's about to get, slowly released on something like that.
Give us a tease of just one that pops into your head.
Oh, jeez.
Besides the game outside.
Well, I think it was my first season actually in 2011, and I'm trying to think. That was the Kyle Rowley. Wasn't it the Kyle Rowley touchdown to the middle of the end zone against the SaberCats? Over the back of the end zone, I'm trying to think of the receiver that caught the ball. Gigantic hands. He went on and played for a few other teams too. Was it Hines? I'm going to have to think. I think, my first season, more or less, we beat San Jose. I'm pretty sure I'm talking about the right game. Caught the ball over the back of the end zone. I was actually up in the ticket booth, more or less, watching on a prompter in the customer service area. Saw that happen, and just that was like a gigantic win for the team. My first season there, to feel like that electricity, in the building and that, just that roar of the crowd that we felt, obviously throughout the entire place was pretty special. And then
Randy Himes, by the way.
Randy Himes, there you go. Yeah, I was close. There you go. So yeah, having that happen though, and then going out with the team afterward and, hanging out and learning a little bit more, obviously, about the fun side of it, after toward the end of that first season. I think that was something pretty special for me and really getting my career started and kind of capping off that first season and ultimately, led to some pretty cool things down the road too.
Any regrets at all?
Plenty.
Obviously, I said you went on to bigger and better things in the IFL, but any AFL regrets?
Any AFL regrets? Oh, probably a few onside kick attempts that we made against Arizona and San Jose here and there, but I don't think so. I think I think it would be more of a personal thing for me, like going back to the Arena Football League. I think it would have been cool if I wouldn't worked for another team, like, to be honest, like just to jump someplace else. I did obviously a number of years in Spokane between the Arena Football League and the Indoor Football League. I think, and it was my plan actually. Every 2 or 3 years, I kind of looked at myself in the mirror and said, okay, this is gonna be my last year, and I'm gonna go do something else, sort of gig. But I was just presented with such great opportunities, seemingly every year in Spokane to move up and do something different, that it was hard to, let go of and go do something else. So, but yeah, I think I would have probably gone and tried to work for somebody else, just to get that experience, different cities, see it from a different side of things. And yeah, start someplace a little bit more ground up versus, obviously inheriting, I feel like, a great situation in Spokane and what they had built and things like that in the past. Granted, I got my lumps later in my career because then I went to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and San Diego, and some other places that I had to more or less restart an organization. So that was definitely the other side of it.
Did any team ever in the AFL come to you and offer you something?
I talked to a few different teams, like off and on. I had a good relationship with Joe down in Arizona, and I talked with New Orleans a little bit too. They were kind of back and forth, and Pat O'Hara and I had a few conversations when they were looking at, coming back at one point and doing some stuff. So yeah, I mean, I had good contacts around the league and some great folks that I worked with, too, that, always kind of kept their ears open for me. But yeah, it is what it is.
Would you ever gone to the head office?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think that would have been fun. Yeah. And, I know Joe Kleinsmith, probably fielded more calls than any of us, just from a player perspective and coaches and everything else too. So, later, even though, we had our own back and forth, plenty, when we were on, opposing sides of the desk in a manner of speaking based on positions early on, I think later in my career, I gained more respect for those people as you look back, just having a better understanding of what it was that, they did on a daily basis. And more than anything, what they put up with, is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, for sure. Any memento? Oh, actually, did you have a regret? Did you ever get a play in the coach's playbook?
I didn't. Learning arena ball and things like that. I mean, even for myself, being a former quarterback and a football guy and stuff like that too. Tell you what, my head was spinning when we were sitting there trying to do those playbooks. Like my first season, I mean, just learning the different ins and outs, and it was certainly fascinating. There's a lot of concepts there and things. I think indoor football for me is a little bit easier, even just from the coaching perspective, just because there's a little more outdoor, related elements to it. So yeah, didn't get a play in Andy's playbook, that's for sure. But down the road was able to work on a few things.
Your most memorable piece of memorabilia besides the playbook?
I think I pretty much have a football from every season. I do my own jersey for each team that I work with.
Nice.
And the year concept. So I do have. I think I did a blue shock jersey. I think when we did that relook, kind of like the Gladiators had with the side logos and stuff. Actually, they pretty much duplicated the jerseys these days. So yeah, I got a shock jersey though. That's probably one of my key pieces.
Cool. Somebody comes up to you in say 5 to 7 years. They know you were involved with the AFL. The league is not still around. We'll say the league has never come back. And somebody says to you, well, can you tell them, Ryan, what would you say about the AFL? I've never heard about it. Can you tell me about it? What would you tell this fan?
Well, I use a phrase or a saying even with indoor football as well. But when I'm trying to explain arena football, and I use it arena generally in that matter, when I'm trying to explain it to someone that's never seen it before, but maybe they at least have some sports and live experience, I tell them it's football on a hockey rink with basketball scoring at a WWE event.
I see. Okay, I never heard it put that way. That's actually good.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I go for. So you get the live entertainment. You're right there, close as what you can get to any professional sport out there. Including basketball as well, just with where you're on the boards. But it's an experience. It's entertainment. It's lights. It's dance team girls. It's music. It's Running Man meets football. So.
There's a great reference. People say, "What's Running Man?" I say, "Just look at the Schwarzenegger movie. You'll know exactly what we're talking about."
Exactly.
In your opinion, last question. In your opinion, based on everything that we've seen, we know you've been disconnected from the AFL for a few years. But in your opinion, from what you've seen, do you see the AFL returning at all?
I don't know if it returns in the exact form of what it used to be. I think there's a few difficulties that they still need to get over, mainly from the business side that we kind of alluded to a little bit in our conversation, just regarding single entity and, workers' comp and the medical stuff and things like that, which can be, extremely detrimental. So I don't know if it comes back in the same form, and part of that's probably also to run from, union and CBA talk and, going back down that rabbit hole that they've been through a few different times now.
Right.
But I think arena/indoor football absolutely survives. It's proven that it can, even in some of the smallest communities. So I don't see why it can't get back to where it was, once long ago from a viewership or even from a, PR, national media, TV perspective in some capacity, particularly now with the streaming capabilities that are out there these days. In the way that obviously everything's going there. So yeah, I don't know if it'll come back in the same form, rebound nets, single entity, etc. But I think indoor football as a whole, if you look at it as kind of one group with a few subsets, I absolutely think it'll survive.
We want to thank Ryan for joining us for this episode of AFL Rewind. As I mentioned at the top of the show, usually you do get a little bit more insight to the day-to-day operations of a team, and it was great hearing his side of the story. and the stories themselves that came out during his time with the Spokane Shock. If you have any suggestions on players or executives that you'd like to see on the show for future episodes, you can email us at aflrewind@arenafan.com, and we will try our best to make sure that we get those people on the show as quickly as possible. If you happen to miss any of the previous episodes of AFL Rewind, you can head over to our archive in a couple of places. You can head over to SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or our audio version over on YouTube. And also, when you're there on any of those platforms, make sure you give us a like and give us a good review. So this will be the last show for the 2020 year. We do want to thank you for everything that you have done for us as listeners for this very strange season. And we do hope to bring you more information and more inside looks to the league itself going forward in 2021. So for everybody here at AFL Rewind, make sure you stay safe, wear a mask, and do your part. I'm Tim Capper. Watch the rebound off the net.